Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. We have for you guys actually one of my kind of long-term clients, I'd call you. We have Michael Loeffler for you guys. He is a private practice psychotherapist in Sonoma County, and he specializes in amateur and professional athletes in an individual depth work. And if he isn't training for a trail race, he's most likely with his partner and two children foraging for mushrooms, which I want to dive into that with you for sure. But,
Sure.
Or he's attending a myriad of domestic responsibilities, he says, as one finds in midlife. So thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here. Hopefully
Awesome.
I can offer some insight and some things to reflect on.
Yes, definitely. We will dive into all that shortly here. But before we reveal too much about Michael, we are going to dive right into his two truths and a lie. So why don't you break those down for us, Michael?
Okay. All right. So the first one is I love blue cheese.
Okay.
That's one. The second one is once I drove 7 hours in the middle of the night to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania,
wow.
to see the groundhog.
Okay.
And the last one is I love sharing food off my plate with my wife and my kids.
Okay. I'm going to guess that the third one is a lie. I don't know what. I mean, I feel like not everybody loves to have people grab food off their plate, but so I feel like that could be a lie. What do you think, Nia?
I'm going with number one, just because I personally don't love blue cheese. I'm not a fan of it at all.
All right.
I feel like it's a very polarizing food. So
yeah, that could be a lie. I have to say, in all our nutrition check-ins, I haven't heard you mention blue cheese, I don't think. But don't tell us. Don't tell us.
I usually hide that from you.
Yeah. Keep that off the record. Awesome. So we will reveal his lie at the end and disclose which were his two truths. But before we kind of get down to that piece of it, why don't you give us a little background, Michael, how you got into this field and what was kind of your journey here?
And you're in respect to psychotherapy and
yeah.
Well, it's kind of a long haul. I mean, I guess, I was never one to really reflect too much on my thoughts when I was a kid. You know, I was more of just a get out there and rough and tumble, run around, kind of your typical, I guess, boy, if you will, rough and tumble kind of kid.
Yeah.
But I guess when I got to undergrad, I went from pre-med to biopsychology, and then eventually to philosophy, which, you know, I don't want to say it was because I was feeling smarter as I went along. It was because I actually was kind of lazier. And I found philosophy classes interesting because we would sit around and talk the whole time and write papers.
Yeah. And
I got to interact with just really interesting people. I wrestled in college, so I had this one life of, you know, Division I wrestling, top 10 team, highly competitive wrestling team. And then I got to hang out with guys with mohawks and, you know, philosophizing about things. So I thought this is the way to do it.
That's cool.
So I went down that road, and then after that, I actually got an internship in business, which, thank goodness, the chair of the philosophy department helped me with that, because I don't know if I would have gotten a job.
Oh, wow.
Like some people said, I would have been driving a taxi with a philosophy degree. My parents weren't too excited about it.
Yeah.
But I ended up, you know, getting a job at a pharmaceutical company and went into sales for like 10 years.
Wow.
And which gave me a chance to have some income and also be independent. And then I moved from New York City to the Catskill Mountains. And I kind of did this alternative lifestyle briefly while holding on to the sales job. Wow. And I started practicing Zen meditation at a Zen center.
Whoa. And
I was really close to actually like shaving my head and moving into a Zen center and practicing meditation for, I don't know how long I was going to do that, until I met my wife. And she said, "You're not moving into a Zen center, honey."
Oh.
Yeah, and then eventually I went back to grad school which was in San Francisco, to study at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I could learn spirituality and psychology.
Cool.
And so it was kind of a merger between the two disciplines. One of the few schools that could do it, where I could also get a a master's degree and be able to practice psychotherapy
Mm.
here in California.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was the sort of interesting journey that I took to get where I am today.
Yeah. And can you, for myself and the listeners, break down the difference between psychotherapy and maybe other forms of therapy?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some philosophies in terms of approaching the psyche around symptom reduction. So if you have a
Mm-hmm.
problem, I have this issue and I want to get rid of this symptom.
Mm.
So some psychology schools, which has its place,
Mm-hmm.
like if you're afraid of crossing a bridge, you want to try to figure out how to deal with that so you can cross the bridge, right?
Yeah.
I tend to look at symptoms more as a communication deeper within the self,
Mm.
similar to what we might find with an athlete, right? So an athlete has, like, if there's a symptom going on, rather than let me get rid of the problem, try to understand holistically what's going on with the body that's affecting them.
Yeah.
So I tend to see myself from that standpoint, from that camp, which, some patients will come in and they'll say, hey, Michael, can you help me fix this problem? And I say, okay, let's talk about what's going on. And sometimes the symptom actually can lead to sort of a greater integration of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't try to just focus on one thing. I just try to be more broad about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's more holistic.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of translates or transfers to the article that we read and kind of bulleted out for our discussion today. Do you recall the title of that article and where people can find that? Since we're probably
it was
referencing.
that's okay. It was in freetrail.com. It was an article I wrote about basically midlife as a trail runner.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to point out a distinction between someone who's in the earlier competitive life versus the latter parts of life. And when I say latter, I'm not 75 years old. I'm 44 years old. So I'm still, relatively speaking, there's still a lot of competition I could be doing at this age.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, what I tried to point out was that you have to kind of change what your goals are.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always to win races at this age, unless you're, the top percentage.
Mm-hmm.
It's to find other motivations for yourself to be out there and competing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I wanted to talk about was that, hey, let's have a conversation about this. And so we can embrace who we are now
Mm-hmm.
and embrace the joys that we find ourselves in at this age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in that article you mentioned potentially people losing motivation, but also kind of figuring out what their why is and finding their why. Can we dive into that? How does one find what their why is? Because I know it can be a hard process maybe for some people to determine what their true why is, right?
Yeah, I think you have to really look at yourself
Mm-hmm.
in those situations, because what I tend to find, and this is something I struggled with personally, was that, I was a competitive athlete, right, for a long time. And my why was pretty simple. It was to win my wrestling matches and
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that I was competing as hard as I could and, maintaining sort of a certain level of competition, both on season and off season.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got older, I realized not only was I starting to flag in terms of competition, like I also realized that, first of all, I couldn't wrestle into my 20s and 30s unless I went to the Olympic level, which I just didn't have that sort of, it was not in the cards for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I still wanted to be physically active.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the thing that I tried to think about is, like, what is your why is getting down to what matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much about whether you're winning or losing, but more about, like, what you're experiencing. It sounds cliche, but the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you want to feel afterward?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what I kept realizing was that when I was competing, I was just so trashed afterward that I couldn't even really function around my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I don't want to show them that this is what you do when you compete at this level, like as an endurance athlete, that you're just thrashed for days and you can't play with them. You can't do these fun things. So I wanted to show them that this is something I do that's more vital. It's a vitality, for me, that when I'm finished, I'm energized and I feel alive.
Yeah.
So for someone who's listening or somebody who's trying to reflect on that in themselves, I think it's really looking at, honestly, like, how do you want to feel when you're finished with something? And
Mhm.
sometimes that can be a good why.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you
And,
feel afterward?
and I think that's a good kind of tool for people to think about to help them figure out that why and how they want to feel after. Are there any other tools or resources you potentially recommend for people when they're trying to figure out their why?
I kind of take a little bit of it's a somewhat of an alternative approach. I mean, we all, like, I'll preface it this way. We all talk to ourselves from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
right? What I like to do is to do more of like kind of an automatic kind of writing. I recommend for people.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be to sort of find that voice in you that, if you're having a conversation with yourself. So for example, Michael, why are you getting up today to do this run?
Mm.
And so you would actually personify the thing that's answering. You
Mm.
could just call it, I don't know, my other self or something like that.
Yeah.
And you'd have a conversation with that part of yourself. The other self says, well, I really like the way I feel when I get up and run in the mornings.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, yeah, me too. I really enjoy that as well. And so you have a little bit of a discussion with a part of yourself. So it's called parts work.
Mm.
And you sort of write this out. And what you can do as you start to communicate with this other voice inside of you is you can kind of distill yourself down
Mm-hmm.
into more of the essence of what it is that you want to do. So for example, my wife asked me, why are you still running all the time? What is it? Why do you like to do this? And you know what I came back to after having a conversation with myself was like, I like to be capable of running long distances in the mountains
Mm-hmm.
because I feel good when I do it. I love the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't start off with that thought. I was like, well, I just like to do it because it's fun. I get to run and, compete.
Mm-hmm.
That really wasn't what it was about.
Mm-hmm.
But through that discussion with myself, with that part of myself, I realized that it's feeling capable to run distances in the mountains.
Yeah.
So I can travel and explore the world. That was sort of what I came to, which is wonderful, right?
Yeah.
Who can complain about that? And she can get behind that too.
Exactly. I love that. Do you find, I think about like a lot, like many clients maybe that come to us and they have a goal of like weight loss, for example. And I think many times, I think many of us know weight loss isn't always very successful, hence like the state of the population right now.
Sure.
And is it potentially, I know with nutrition and weight loss, there are so many factors, but I would imagine too, the why behind that maybe isn't quite as strong. Do you find anything like that in your practice where it's maybe more vanity based and it's not something that maybe they can get behind or, stick with?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if it's enough sometimes. Vanity isn't enough to stay with something.
Yeah.
Is what I've found. In fact, what I tend to find is that, at least with exercise, that what starts to change with somebody isn't, sure, you might lose some weight, right? You might feel fitter, your parents might be looser, and that feels good, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels good. But what I find people tend to enjoy more is that they feel strong in their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you feel strong in your body, you start to see yourself differently.
Yeah.
So for example, if I have a little weight on my waist, but I know that I just ran 20 miles, like it gives context to that. I know I'm in good shape.
Yeah.
And I feel strong. And so this is a good body to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And so that can change the way you feel about something. And it gives you a different kind of feedback loop versus just sort of an objective vanity piece.
Yeah.
Now, vanity has its place, right? At times, it does motivate us. And sometimes to have that feedback is good, but it can't be the only thing. It's not sustainable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a big piece of it. It's not sustainable. And let's see, in your article too, you mentioned kind of traits of, you called them air quotes, young guns versus the mature adult lifers. Can you give us some kind of examples of these qualities or traits that you kind of see in the young guns versus the mid-lifers?
Yeah, I mean, we all were at some point, right? The young guns. So for me, the young gun for me was in 2001 when I ran my first marathon.
Mm.
I remember I would go out partying until 3 and 4 in the morning and get up the next day and run 16 miles.
Oh my goodness.
Without like placing water, without any like nutrition considerations.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I would have a good time with my friend, like nothing happened.
Yeah.
Right. So you get away with a lot more
Mm-hmm.
as a young gun, and you don't. And let me just say this too. I don't think there's something wrong with being a young gun.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's wonderful. And I love that some people can do that still. And I'm not going to be like, well, he should be a little more firmer about his, training schedule. Because I mean, I've been there and it's not for me to judge. Now, they could change their perspective to some extent, and they'll start to learn about recovery, or maybe listen to an elder, somebody who has a little more experience, and can say, well, listen, it's not a good idea to do that after being out so late. You're setting your muscles up this way, and you're not going to recover that way. If you want to take to the next level, maybe you should think about this.
Yeah.
So I think the young gun attitude sometimes is to go out hard and to push themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way that I positioned it in the article is that inevitably we get to a point as we go along the road of life where we can't get away with that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really hard turning point to go through that. And rather than shut down and stop exercising or stop taking care of ourselves, this is the time to sort of recalibrate ourselves and to adjust what our goals are and what we're trying to do. And that's where I think having communication with somebody who has more experience than you, a mentor or a coach, can sort of help you with that transition. Mm-hmm. And it also helps you clarify what your goals are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that right there absolutely applies to, many athletes, right? It's like, or I will say I've had many athletes come to me, probably kind of almost the exact same story, in the sense of like, they maybe were very successful in some form of sport at some point in their younger age. And then maybe life responsibilities came up, and then that sport didn't carry on into like post-college or maybe even post-high school, right? And they kind of like lost that. And now they're trying to come back and find some form of fitness in the endurance world, whether that's running, triathlon, cycling, and trying to, some of them, want to get back to like, I like when I was 22, I could used to do this pace, or I could, do this many miles. Right. And, I think that's a good point, is like kind of reestablishing or like reframing, I think you said in the article, and accepting some kind of, different level of, I guess, training capabilities, but within yourself. And I think, the article is really wonderful, and we'll link in the show notes for the listeners, because I do encourage people to go and read that. But I think Michael will give us a bunch of good nuggets today here too, because a big piece of the article was, like you were saying, taking some of that information, potentially like reframing how we think about it. And now it's like it becomes like our power tool, that change. Right. And so could you dive into a little bit of that and maybe give us some examples?
Yeah. I think when you're younger, you don't have limits. You don't know what your limits are. Yeah. But you also, I think when you're younger, you don't quite understand what discipline is sometimes too. Mm-hmm. So it's a trade-off. So I think as you mature as an athlete, you start to gain more discipline. Mm-hmm. But you also have to engage more with your limits. And so your potential changes, but you can extract a lot more as you get older, and there's more purpose and there's more meaning to what you're doing. So when you're younger, I think what I wrote about in the article was about like things are more timeless. You don't really worry about tomorrow so much. Yeah. You just keep racing, you keep running. And a lot of the time successful athletes will be 3 or 4 years deep into a highly successful run, for example, but they haven't really had a chance to take in what it is that they've done until an injury happens, or when they start to no longer be peaking and winning those races. And then they look back, my goodness, I had a heck of a run, and I wasn't able to appreciate that. Yeah. So again, it goes back to this sort of mentor, sort of helping someone see the joy that they're in while they're in it. the success that they have, which I think a lot of times younger athletes they don't have that conversation, and they're missing out on how wonderful it is that they're doing. What they're able to do is incredible. And so to be able to appreciate that more is, I think, the goal for a younger athlete, just to sort of partner up with somebody to sort of help them see that a little more.
And is that, do you think because they're kind of like always thinking about the next thing, or? Yeah,
they're always thinking about the next thing, or they're not thinking about what they're doing in the first place. They're just doing what they think they need to be doing. And so it's sort of it's a double-edged sword. On some level, you've had an injury or you've had a setback, and fortunately, in some sports, you can have that injury or setback early enough in your career where you can have the appreciation and reflection of, oh my goodness, I still have 5 more years to compete at the elite level. Now I know what it's like to not be able to do that. I'm going to savor these next 5 years.
Yeah, that becomes like a driver, maybe even to like get stronger.
And to savor it, and and maybe to focus more on the discipline. The discipline piece. To give it what you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. When something kind of gets taken away from you in an unplanned manner, it kind of hopefully makes someone appreciate what they had to begin with and get you back there if you want it.
1,000%. You know, that's the thing is to become conscious of how wonderful you are and what you're able to do.
Yes, it is pretty incredible. I'll share a little personal story. My senior year of high school, so I really got into mountain biking in high school, and my senior year prom night, my driver fell asleep at the wheel, and the car, and I was asleep in the passenger seat, and the car crashed, and somehow in the flipping of the car, my legs went out the passenger window, and the car pinned my legs between a tree, and I was conscious the entire time. And I was stuck in the car for several hours until they could get the car off my legs. But I mean, I was in there for a couple hours. So it was something where I started thinking like, am I going to have my legs? Am I going to be able to still ride my bike? Like those kind of things went through my head. I got out of there. I went to the hospital. They x-rayed my whole body. I did not break a single bone.
That's incredible.
I Gumby legs or something.
Talk about a divine intervention. My goodness.
So I have to say, like when we talk about the why thing, and then like that is something I think about personally with my experience having that happen, having been like on crutches and by no means that was like people go through severely more extreme stuff, but to just have an experience like that where it really makes you, appreciate what your body can do and just get out there and move and feel strong. And it's having, not everybody, obviously I can twist my, kind of what you're saying is like, look back at it and like have a positive spin on it now looking back, but,
in the moment, though, you probably had no idea what was going to happen, but you probably really woke up to how grateful you were, I would imagine, afterward.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I really started to fall more in love, I think, too, with like being outside and using my body and just seeing what it could do. And that is when shortly after that is when I got really into more trail running. At the time, I knew nothing. I did not have a coach. I was just doing it because I liked it.
Right.
And then ran myself into some IT ban issues because again, I wasn't doing anything right at the time.
I've been there.
Yes. So then I kind of got more back into biking, but that's definitely been a strong why, I think, for myself personally. But it's I think using those, whatever that is that's happened to somebody, like you're saying, like whether it's injury or maybe you just don't have the time to do, and life gets super crazy. And then the moments you do get to do that thing, it's like you realize why you found so much joy in doing those things. But
absolutely. I mean, some of us, like you said, some of us have these extreme events, and some of us have this sort of slow, chronic kind of thing, which is where the depression can come in.
Yeah.
And that just sort of, it's an accumulation. And sometimes that can manifest in how we carry ourselves in our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
just like kind of crunched down and just the weight of life. And you can see that also sort of, wearing on somebody until they have this sort of realization, which could be anything from like, I was huffing and puffing, cutting the lawn. Like, why is this happening to me? I had someone tell me that one time. Like, and I realized that I needed to get in better shape and take care of myself.
Yeah.
So realizations can come in these great events, or they can come in these small events. But the thing is we have to listen to that voice in us. And that's the why, is listening to that little voice inside of us that says, ooh, something's not quite right here. Let's make an adjustment.
Do you ever find, like in the situation with maybe the person who said you had trouble like huffing and puffing, mowing the lawn, do you ever have to help people implement that change too? Meaning like they know they should change, they should be able to breathe easily. But then actual implementation of it is a challenge.
That's the hardest part. And sometimes I kind of have this image that when I meet a patient, we have to sort of carve out the cage that they have put themselves in. And there's 1,000 excuses. Oh, I can't do this, or I can't get to that, and I'm too busy. And I think you have to embrace some level of sacrifice in order for transformation to happen. And you have to set the time aside, even if you don't do the thing that you're supposed to do with it. I think sort of setting time aside can really help. Even if you struggle with it, you just know for these 30 minutes, I'm going to take care of myself, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to ease into this situation, or I'm going to go for a run once a week, for 30 minutes. Some people go, oh, I'm going to start off with 3 days a week, and I got this program, and that never works.
Yeah.
You have to create these habits in yourself. And that's the hardest thing, is to sort of get beyond the motivation and to sort of kind of create these cues in your mind to kind of create a new habit for yourself. And breaking out of that is the hardest part.
Yeah.
It's first noticing how you got there. And then it's knowing how to take that first tiny step. And we all know that tiny step. It's just that something a little bit different that we do. It's like it's a small choice. It's one meal a day. I make a different decision on how I eat today. One meal or one choice. And that little thing can accumulate for us. But it's that little pivot that's the hardest part for us. And I think sometimes faking it till you make it works in those moments.
Yeah.
Like try it. It doesn't feel quite right, or it feels humiliating to do this small little thing. But these little things, they do create momentum for yourself.
Yeah. I think you said something there that I also talk to my clients about, is setting a goal that so almost seems too easy. The example of like, I'm going to run 3 times a week, or, I was speaking with a client recently, and our goal we set was just a 10-minute walk a day, and he has a treadmill, so he could do it in like right there in his office. So
that's great.
I think for him, even sometimes doing that was challenging, right? So it's finding, I think, that thing that, you set that goal and hopefully it seems too easy, or maybe it's as simple of like, I've heard the example of just putting your shoes on is the goal. Like, you don't have to go out the door, but typically,
that's right.
Once you put those shoes on, it's like, well, I might as well,
That's right. That's right. It's like how habits form. We have to cue our minds into the habit. And I like some of James Cleary's sort of Atomic Habit book. I mean, that it's so practical, these habit stacking and these things that we can do to sort of kind of make these little changes for ourselves.
Yeah.
Make a big difference. And I like to think of it is to sort of make the habit easy. And maybe he sort of talks about that, but it's not the intensity of the habit. It's the repetition of the habit that matters most. Repetition is what leads to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I have a client coming in and talking about how they're not changing, and each week we talk about how they're not changing, as frustrating as it is, the more you look at it, eventually something starts to shift. You get frustrated with yourself, or you get tired of hearing yourself. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can stay with it, you can stay with what's not happening. Eventually you start to move into some things that can happen,
Mm-hmm.
but you
Yeah.
have to stay with, you have to stay conscious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think too, when you say that, it made me think of a client I was speaking with recently where they were saying that they haven't made any changes. But then when we started talking more, they had made changes. And so it's kind of like they don't see these, ticks on the board, or, they are checking some of these boxes, but they're kind of putting themselves in the mindset. Like, I think honestly, with a lot of athletes too, many of them are very type A and like want to be all in and super good at something. And then when they're not doing completely all of it perfectly, then it's
Right.
they feel like they're not doing it at all, when in reality, like, there is some wins happening. And it's interesting. I think, I mean, a lot of stuff you're mentioning just makes me think of so many client stories with regards to nutrition and stuff like that. But that's why I think you're such an awesome person to have on here too, for all of this. So, I mean, kind of, we talked a little bit about the young guns and the midlifers and kind of finding why and finding that, maybe reasoning to keep going, or reframing that too. And I think maybe we could dive a little bit into the reframing part of that too. Like, if something does come up that maybe throws someone a loop or gets them off their routine, how does someone reframe that? Or could you kind of give some examples of that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of highlighted something I think is really important, is to sort of reflecting on your wins along the way, because if we're really critical of ourselves, we're only going to see the things that we're not doing. And sometimes a reframe can be, well, let's look at the small things that you have done.
Yeah.
Right. Here we are talking again about this. That's a win.
Yeah.
We met again and we're talking about what's happening here. You're trying to stay conscious to this. That's something that counts for something. So reframing around that can be really helpful, is just helping somebody see what it is that they are doing. And I think that's where, I was thinking of just quantification and technology kind of comes in and can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Is sometimes technology can show us the changes that are happening in us that we're not always conscious of. That's the positive side of it. We can go down the road of the negative side, but I think the positive side is that more quantification actually can help us get started with stuff. It can help us reflect back on what it is that we're doing. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that if we're hypercritical, or we have like an inner voice that says, oh, you're not doing enough, or this could be better, or you made this mistake with that, or you missed this run, or you cheated on this, like all these sort of things that really make you human end up becoming like hyper pathologized. And so you sort of beat yourself up, and then you just give up before you have a chance to sort of take the joy in of what you've achieved.
Yeah. What are your kind of thoughts and suggestions or tips, maybe, or tools for someone when they kind of get to that point? And I think maybe the example I can like translate it to from a nutrition perspective is someone goes out on the weekend. We're recording this during December, so the holidays, people go out to a holiday party, they dive into the, who knows, appetizers or whatever, have a couple cocktails, and before you know it, the next day they're like, well, yesterday was a wash, so I'm gonna just keep cruising and go to the holiday cookies at the office kitchen. And what are your thoughts or suggestions for people when they get in that mindset where they feel like they've just almost like screwed it up, so they just shouldn't kind of even hone back in on it?
I think forgiveness is a good thing to start with, is to forgive yourself and to recognize that you're human, and that part of being a human being is making mistakes. And it can be quite humbling when that happens. We're not machines. Yeah. And sometimes we can be seduced into sort of situations that, we didn't anticipate. And we have to learn from those times when they happen. Where it becomes the problem is that when, like you sort of were saying, well, then I'm throwing it all out the window. because I'm terrible with what I did, and there's no clawing back on things.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't forgive yourself, then you stay in this sort of state of mind where you're really criticizing yourself. And so what I like to try to do is help people try to understand that this is the inner critic in your mind that's coming in and is losing sight that is turning one day into 1 month of activity.
Yeah.
And so it's not really contextualized. It's not really, it's being blown out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can sort of understand, oh, I'm getting in that place. I'm getting in that place again where I'm hard on myself and I'm really being too harsh on what I did. I'm going to try to forgive myself for this, give myself a pass.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start with this next situation anew.
Yeah.
You know, I have lunch coming up next. I'll do something different, that one thing different, and I'll kind of create a new positive momentum again. You know, or, you know, I'm going to go for a walk today. I'm not going to make up for what I did, but I'm going to just do that little walk today and just try to let go of what happened and forgive myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's really helpful because I do think, I think people can be too hard on themselves, you know, and can get kind of, especially I feel like too during the holidays, and especially if people have goals or want to improve health or things of that nature. And you have these parties you're invited to and people are giving you boxes of cookies and, you know,
Oh,
all these
gosh,
things.
yeah. It's never ending. My goodness. I mean, where do these things come from? And who's eating all these things? I mean, it just astounds me. Like, how can I possibly eat 30 cookies? You know, it's like, oh my goodness, it's so much stuff. But yeah, it's, you know, it's being generous to give things away. It's okay to throw stuff out. I can't tell you how many things I throw out that come home from my kids. I mean, God, it's like, where does this, how did you get all this stuff? So I think it's just sort of giving yourself permission to let go of things, giving yourself permission to forgive yourself, and recognizing that you're gonna sort of slip up and make mistakes, but that's what makes you human. And you just have to, you know, wash your hands of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And does this kind of translate to the growth mindset that you were talking about in the article?
Yeah. Having an attitude that setbacks, mistakes, injuries, losses are all opportunities to grow.
Yeah.
So it's an attitude. It's having a different attitude about things. And recognizing that, you know, I like to think of a wave, you know, like the wave sort of comes up, it's cresting, you're growing, but then it kind of curls back on itself and you feel like you're going back, you know, and then it dissipates, but then it comes back again. And life is kind of like that. You know? You have these things, you're losing sight of the momentum, even though you feel like you're going back, and you are a little bit, but you're still moving forward.
Yeah.
And that this is the natural process of life. That's how we integrate things.
Yeah.
Right. You work hard and then you recover, you know, like, so you run slow for a couple of days because you need to. Now, if you judged yourself on that, then, and you just kept going hard all the time, that's where the accidents happen.
Yeah.
That's where mistakes take place.
Definitely. Yeah. That could lead you down another path, the overtraining or injury or stuff like that. So kind of, you talked a little bit about it just now, that kind of like how coaching that growth mindset in an athlete is there a common, out of curiosity, is there a common theme from an athlete world that you see pop up a lot, that they struggle with the growth mindset?
Yeah. I think a lot of people struggle with this, the kind of either or thinking. I'm great or I'm the worst.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
And that sort of binary way of thinking, it bypasses all the stuff in the middle. And because our ego likes to categorize things as this or that. But that's not how our bodies work, right? Or it's not how, I don't know, you pick it. Everything has sort of a gradation between it.
Yeah.
So I think it's just it's helping people fill in between that binary way of thinking of being successful or not successful. So it's sort of like looking at, well, what did I did that went really well? What are the things that I can improve on, as opposed to what are the mistakes I made?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Do you ever use like number scales in your practice? I thought I remember someone saying something like on a scale of 1 to 10, like 10 being you're awesome. Like, how would you rate yourself? And then I think she said like a tool she used is she would ask them, say they said a 5.
Mhm.
She would ask them why not like a 2 or 3, as opposed to, there was some reason specifically she said why she would ask them why not a lower number as opposed to a higher number.
Right.
I
Well,
don't-
I think because when you choose the 5, you're kind of not really answering the question, right?
That
It's
could be
like,
it. Yeah.
I just did average. Well, 5
Yeah.
doesn't really say too much. It says you're kind of
Yeah.
right down the middle. Like,
Right.
I don't know if our mind works that way.
Yeah.
You know, you might be thinking you did more of a 6 or 7 or a 3 or 4. There kind of aren't really any 5s in this scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
You know.
That's interesting. Yeah, that might be why that would make sense now. So let's see, anything that I'm missing from that article that you want to share?
No, I think the main thing that I just want to just reiterate for people is that there's a lot of joy and success to be had at all ages in sport. And I think that's the most wonderful thing about endurance sports is that you can get out there and you can run and you can cycle and you can swim for a very long time.
Yeah.
And sort of adjust what you think is successful.
Yeah.
Because if you're too hard on yourself at that critical moment, which is typically between the ages of 30 and 45, where a lot of things can go astray in our health. We can go down the road of having congestive heart failure, or we can go down the road of being sort of active and being able to interact with our kids and eventually our grandkids. Like those sorts of things can happen, but don't give up on sort of being active and build slow.
Yeah.
You know, that's sort of the thing that I kind of want to really focus on is like, don't have that first half of life attitude towards sport now because it's limited. You need to have bring this other piece in, try to experience it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it needs to be something too that's sustainable, right? For longevity. I mean, if you want to live a long life, I guess I should say, and you want to be able to get up off the toilet when you're old and pick up your grandkids. Yeah.
1,000%. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's important. And we were talking with a cyclist. She was talking about her retirement and trying to kind of find what her next thing in life would be. And she seems pretty active generally and has many other hobbies. So I'm sure she'll kind of find out what that thing is. But I think that can be an area from definitely maybe like a higher performing athlete world too. Is like when that pro career is over, what happens? You know, what do you do next? And how do you turn that off in your brain because many of them still will go to races and perform, but it's at a different level. And, you know, they lose their sponsors and it's quite an ordeal when that happens to athletes at a higher level. Do you have any thoughts on that or?
I think it's, again, it goes back to ensuring that you have people that you can talk to, that you have mentors.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and not being afraid to consume writing or podcasts or books that are written by athletes who are on the other side of their professional career.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I think recommending that can be really helpful for people because you can also learn a lot too. Again, this is that bridge issue that people have to generations. It not only does it exist in everyday life, but it really exists with sport. And that, you know, connecting those two voices is incredible. What you can learn about what it means to be an athlete.
Yeah.
Like I can tell you, I was listening to a podcast. I think it was Jason Koop's podcast.
Oh yeah.
And he was sort of gone for a while, and he had a different guest on the AJW, and
Okay.
he'd interviewed all these guys that had been ultra runners like in the 80s, a long
Oh.
time ago, and learning like what they used to sort of carry for water bottles. But one of the things that stood out to me was this like trail work. Like somebody's taking care of these trails.
Yeah.
And you know how much I think about that?
Yeah.
Hardly at all.
Right.
And I was thinking, my goodness, like maybe I need to sort of put some time into that. And maybe there's something I can learn from some of these folks,
Yeah. Yeah. That is a great point you make, because many of these trails are built and maintained by somebody's doing it, right?
Yeah. Oh, they sure are.
Yeah. And we're out there enjoying them. But yeah, I know with a lot of, definitely with the mountain biking, I know there's quite a bit of like trail building and jumps and features and all that stuff to be done. And that's a whole thing as well. But yeah, some people also really enjoy doing that kind of stuff too.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can't say I like to do it, but I end up donating money. That's sort of my like get out of jail free card. I feel less guilty.
Yes.
That's my way of doing it. The Redwood Trail Alliance, here in Sonoma County, I always give to them. So
awesome. Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to be mindful of your time.
Yeah.
So let's see. You did a seminar at the Mammoth Trail Fest. Was that talk a similar focus as what we talked about today, or was that a different? Yeah.
Yeah, I had three incredible athletes on stage with me, which including Adam Campbell and Katie Asmuth, who are just incredible trail running athletes, and also Sophia, her last name's evading my memory at the moment, but a lot of what we talked about was just sort of how they dealt with adversity in their lives. Adam Campbell had been through in a rather hard situation. He sort of fell off a cliff similar to Hilly Goat, and broke his back, went through all this sort of like loss, and had to claw his way back. And he actually came back too quickly on a race at Leadville, and we had to pay for. And then he was top of the game. He was like winning ultras left and right. And then he, a few years later, he lost his wife in an avalanche.
Oh no!
Unbelievable story.
Yeah.
So this man has been through hell and back, and to sort of like be able to sit down and talk about how that changed his appreciation for what he was able to do was remarkable.
Wow. Yeah.
Now it's incredible, right? And Katie Asmuth, she also had a major stress fracture injury, and she had to look at a lot of things around, her diet, and also just how hard she was pushing herself.
Yeah.
So we talked just about that sort of rite of passage from the first half of life to the second half of life. And that doesn't mean you're in your 40s when that happens. That can happen at any age.
Yeah.
And we discussed that in front of a lot of people, and it was really insightful.
Wow.
To learn how these athletes have coped with injury and loss and stayed with it.
Wow. Yeah. That's great. And is there a place where people can watch this? Like, is it recorded anywhere on YouTube?
I can't find where it is. I don't know how well curated that one was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll take your word for it. I mean, it sounds pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's great.
Great. That's awesome.
I'll be going back again. I'm looking forward to it.
Are you going to speak
I think I will again. Yeah. Yay. I think I'm going to do like a one-on-one with somebody.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Awesome. Well, and there was a way this last year to watch live, right?
They did some streaming of it.
Yeah.
And I think they'll be doing more of it as well.
Okay. Yeah. We'll have to, if people are listening, do you know when? That's usually late in the year, right? Mammoth?
September.
Okay. Yeah.
Mammoth Trail Fest. Yeah.
Stay tuned for the listeners if you want to watch Michael in September of 2023.
Yes.
Hopefully
exactly.
Tune in. Yeah. That'll be awesome. All right. Well, let's go back to your 2 truths and a lie before we finish up here. So you said you love blue cheese. You said you drove 7 hours in the middle of the night to Pennsylvania to see the groundhog. You said third one was you love sharing food off your plate with your wife and kids. I thought you did not like sharing food off your plate. Nia said no to blue cheese. What is the true lie?
It's blue cheese.
Oh,
Yes. I can't. I've tried many times
Yeah.
over, even Point Reyes, these wonderful blue cheeses that
Oh,
everyone
yeah.
sort of touts and talks about. I just
Yeah.
can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah. I
I
hear
can't do
you.
it.
I'm not a
Feel
blue
that.
cheese fan either, so I'm with you on
Yeah.
that one. But
Yeah.
that's impressive. You drove 7 hours to see the groundhog.
Yeah. That was an interesting decision with my friends. Yes.
Wow.
And it was a different world in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, I assure you.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, we were like, oh my gosh, how did we end up here?
Yeah.
But anyway, it was quite a remarkable
That's
memory
funny.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And
The
good
things we
for
do
you.
in college. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I would say good for you for sharing your food off your plate with your wife and kiddos.
Yeah.
That's good. Did you grow up with siblings?
I did. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I ask because I feel like with my brother, we were always like battling over like, don't take stuff on my plate,
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, that's good. It sounds like you learned how to share pretty well. I probably still have to
Try
work
to.
on it in my old age. Yeah. Awesome. So where can people find you, Michael? Website or social?
Yeah. I mean, I have two things. My Instagram handle is Trail Psyche,
Mhm.
and my website is sanfranciscotherapy.com. So
Awesome.
very easy website to remember.
Perfect. Awesome. And are you taking on any new clients?
I have a few spots, not
Okay.
too many. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's a busy, important guy. Do you take clients from out of California, or how does that work?
I usually, they have to reside in California, or
Gotcha.
I work with internationally. I work with folks. I don't have the same restrictions that way.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Which is fun. It opens up a whole world of European athletes, and it's really
That's
interesting.
cool. Yeah, amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Michael, so much for joining us. This is an amazing episode. I'm so excited for us to share with the
Good.
listeners.
Well, I'm glad to be a part of it. And we went to some interesting places, and there's always more to talk about. I have a lot more to say. So
yeah, I bet. Awesome. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, take care.